Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? This is Watch, and in this video we're going to be comparing two of the most anticipated Android smartphones of the year. I'm talking about the HTC One M9 versus the Samsung Galaxy S6. Now we have the S6 Edge model over here, which is pretty much identical to the standard model besides that curved display, which definitely looks pretty cool. So if you're debating upon whether to go with the M9 or the S6, this is a perfect video for you. And without any further delays, let's get right into my full comparison. Now, the first thing that we want to mention is the design and build quality on these two smartphones are quite parallel. For the past couple of years, Android smartphones have been really stepping up their game in delivering a really quality experience that is up there with what you would get with an Apple product. And these two smartphones are certainly no exceptions. HTC is now famous for delivering some of the best Android smartphones in terms of build quality and designs in the marketplace. And Samsung is new to this entry. The S6 Edge particularly looks quite fantastic. I think with that curve display on both sides of the phone, it really makes the phone look sleek and quite different from many other smartphones. Now, in terms of the build materials, the Samsung Galaxy S6 is made out of primarily aluminum in terms of its overall chassis construction. You can see that aluminum being exposed on the sides, but at the front and back of the device is covered with Gorilla Glass 4, which at times can feel a little bit more delicate than the HTC One, which is made out of 100% metal alloys, and wouldn't surprise me if the tolerances were up there with an armored tank. Now, of course, I realize the GS6 is using Gorilla Glass 4, which is quite shatterproof and scratch resistant, but for me, I still have a phobia that if I do drop the phone at a significant height with a significant amount of force and it lands on its back, you do have that potential of it cracking and ruining the whole look of the phone. Now, in terms of the physical differences between the two, you can see that they're both fairly similar with the exception that the HTC One M9 is just a bit taller, but in terms of thickness, there's quite a big difference. We're looking at about 7mm thickness on the GS6 Edge versus about 9.6mm on the M9. In terms of weight, the M9 is quite a bit heavier at around 157 grams versus about 132 grams on the Samsung. Now, moving forward, let's talk about probably the most important things about any smartphone, and that's the displays. And both these two displays are quite good. They're really quite different in terms of specification, though. The Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge has about a native resolution of 2560 by 1440, and we're looking at 1920 by 1080 on the M9. Pretty big difference in terms of PPI count because they're both very similar in terms of overall screen size. About 577 PPI on the Samsung and about 441 on the HTC One M9. Now, they are using different screen technology. We're using Super AMOLED OLED based technology on the Samsung. We have a Super LCD 3 capacitive touchscreen on the HTC One M9. In terms of the actual quality itself, when you're taking a look at color rendition and things like that, the Samsung, I would say, is definitely better. They're the king of making displays, and this exemplifies that notion quite well. One of the things that Samsung has really done a great job is increasing the luminosity of their displays. In fact, based on some of my measurements, I got about 563 nits maximum brightness on the S6 Edge and about 508 nits on the HTC One M9. So that means, typically speaking, the Samsung is going to deliver brighter brights and much darker lows. One of the great things about OLED technology is you can pretty much effectively turn off the display when it comes to anything that doesn't need to be displayed. So the contrast ratio is pretty much infinite, and there's no point in measuring the contrast ratio on an OLED screen, especially when it comes to dynamic contrast ratio, because of that notion. One of the cool things about the color rendition between these two, now the M9 is not bad by any means. The colors look fairly neutral, and in fact sometimes a little bit too neutral. You get a little bit less contrast with that kind of picture profile that HTC has built into the display, which is a little bit unfortunate because we have a nice realistic balance on the Samsung. Colors look very realistic and not as saturated and as contrasty as previous Samsung displays that looked a little bit too surreal. So a great balance. And in terms of the clarity factor, a lot of people argue that you really don't need a Quad HD display in the first place, but I would argue that in some cases you do find that difference. And even though it may be subtle, there is a difference nonetheless, especially when you look at these two in real life. Now, one of the big highlights on the M9 is certainly those boom sound stereo speakers. Not only are they facing towards you compared to the downwards facing speakers on the Samsung, but they're definitely going to render out a better audio quality, especially in terms of the mid and bass frequencies. But don't take my word for it. Let's go ahead and listen to both of these speakers. Moving forward, let's take a look at the internal specs on these two smartphones. Now, in terms of the CPU capabilities, Samsung has chosen to use a custom Exynos 7420 chip, which is their own processor. It is, in terms of architecture, very similar to the Qualcomm Snapdragon 810 chip that we have on the M9, with the exception that we do have a different clock speed on both of those two quad-core chips that make the octa-core. In terms of RAM, we're using about 3 GB on both smartphones, so they're both going to be fantastic for multitasking capabilities. In terms of the graphics, the Samsung is using the Mali T760 chip versus we're using the Adreno 430 chip on that Snapdragon 810 on the M9. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at the benchmark results that I did. I also have a dedicated speed test video on both these two smartphones, so you definitely want to check out that video if you want more in-depth analysis on the speed test. But looking at the Geekbench 3 results, we can see that there is quite a big difference in terms of score. Even though you would think that they're fairly similar in terms of internal architecture, the Exynos chip on the Samsung side is certainly exceeding the capabilities of the Snapdragon 810 that's in the M9. Furthermore, in terms of our Antutu benchmark, we're seeing similar results where our Samsung Galaxy S6 is breaking records of getting over 60,000 points. Very impressive to see there. And even though the Snapdragon is very fast by its own right, it's still really impressive to see what the Exynos chip can do on the Samsung side. Now let's talk about some of these special and unique features that both of these two smartphones have. Now, one of the big highlights on the HTC One side is that we still have a expandable user memory. So you can expand the internal memory up to whatever you like using that micro SD expansion slot, which is fantastic. We don't have that capability, sadly, on the Samsung side anymore. Now, the GS6 still has a couple of different things. We still have the heart rate monitor located at the back of the device and a much improved fingerprint scanner. Now you just have to lightly touch it and you can unlock the phone or use it as a password replacement. That's a huge advantage compared to the old-fashioned swipe feature we had on the Note 4 and indeed the Samsung Galaxy S5. Now, in terms of the operating system and user experience, they're both very similar. They're both using Android 5.0 Lollipop, which is great, and the skins on top of them are fairly light, and they represent material design fairly well, and they both do a great job of minimizing the extra bloatware that you used to get on some of these Android phones when you don't get a Nexus device. So that's definitely nice to see there. Now, I think really a big factor of which phone you're going to pick is definitely going to be dictated by which features most appeal to you and what you think of the overall design of the user interface. So definitely go out and check out both phones in real life and determine which is best towards you. You can obviously in the future root these two phones and put some kind of ROM on there to make it look like stock Android, which could be cool in the future. I'll definitely explore that option. Now, since we have the Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge, we have a couple of different options because of that curved display. Firstly, you can organize your favorite contacts by swiping in from the side, and you can organize them in terms of colors, and when the phone is facing down and you receive a call from those people, you'll actually see a little light beam going across that edge indicating who's calling. Probably not a feature that anybody will really care about, but a cool gimmick nonetheless. Furthermore, you can also use it as a night clock, and because it's an OLED display, it'll only show you the information that you really need and everything will be off. So it's pretty good in terms of battery efficiency, and plus you can get some notifications for different headlines from Yahoo News if you care about that kind of stuff. So as you can see, I'm really not that impressed in terms of the functionality aspect of the S6 Edge, but I certainly think it looks pretty neat. In the long run, I'm not sure it'll be worth the $100 extra that you'll have to pay over the standard S6 model. Now finally, let's get into the camera differences between these two smartphones. Now we've done a dedicated camera video test, so definitely check that on our channel. It's also in the description down below. And but basically, in terms of the front-facing side, we're looking at a 5 megapixel stills camera with 1080p video on the Samsung Galaxy S6, but we're looking at a 4 megapixel ultra pixel sensor on the HTC One M9. It can also do 1080p video. And one of the cool things about this particular front-facing camera on the HTC side is because it's ultra pixel, so that means the sensor is larger than a typical sensor, so potentially better low light performance. Now on the rear-facing side, we have 20.7 megapixel stills capabilities on the HTC One. Very impressive to see there, and 16 megapixel stills on the Samsung Galaxy S6. We also have 4K video capabilities on both smartphones, as well as 120 frames per second at 720p for all your slow motion needs. Most importantly, we have optical stabilization on the Samsung, so your videos and photos will look very stable, and in terms of low light, that optical stabilization system will help achieve a better low light performance as well. And generally speaking, that's really the case. Even though the HTC has quite a bit more pixels to play with in terms of low light situations and anything that doesn't have perfect lighting, you're going to find better results on the Samsung 9 times out of 10. And the same thing goes for video. Again, check out our main comparison to get more in-depth analysis on the photo differences, but long story short, the Samsung has the better camera. Now, last but not least, we're going to talk about the battery performance on both of these two smartphones. In terms of capacity, we're looking at 26 milliamp hours on the S6 Edge, and the standard S6 has about 50 milliamp hours lower than that. Not going to make a huge difference there. And in terms of the capacity on the M9, we're looking at 40 milliamp hours. Now, based on my personal independent battery performance tests using on a day-to-day basis on my particular user profile, I got about 16 hours of usage on the Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge and about 12 hours usage on the M9 on average after a couple of days. So you could definitely, from my perspective, see that the S6 is outperforming the M9 in terms of battery performance. And if you look at other reviews and other comparison, I think people are having similar results. So generally speaking, looks like the S6 is better in terms of that battery performance compared to the M9. But other than that, guys, that's really it. Make sure to leave a comment down below letting me know on what you guys think of both phones, and definitely check out our other dedicated comparison videos on the specific battery performance, the speed test, and the dedicated camera comparison video as well to get a better idea on how these two compare against each other. But hopefully this video gave you some sort of direction and helped you out in some way in determining which phone is best suited towards your needs. Definitely give us a thumbs up if this helped you out in any ways, and thank you again for watching. We'll see you later. Take care.